I'd like to tell you about my two birth experiences. I'm just one of multiple billions of women in the world who give birth, but this is my experience. When I got pregnant and had my first child in 1970, there was a very high societal expectation that everybody take the first childbirth preparation classes, which were Lamaze. They were taught in every hospital throughout all 50 states. That's what we did. We learned skills. There weren't any choices, but fathers were being permitted in. The skills were, I don't know, they were focused on low risk, normal pregnancies in order to achieve three narrow goals of a natural birth, pain free labor with no medical interventions. But everybody took the classes. The breathing was like this. And we were supposed to be rag dolls. And our husbands were supposed to time contractions, tell us when another one was starting, and lift up our arms to see if we had any external tensions. I had a fairly straightforward birth in a hospital because everybody did, and we had the assessments of the day, the monitoring and procedures, and that's how we did it. And what did I think of the Lamaze skills? Well, at least I had something, and at least my husband had something. But honestly, I couldn't breathe like this for a long period of time. They used to give us paper bags so that we could breathe in the paper bags so we wouldn't hyperventilate so much. Ragdoll? Yeah, I don't know. I gave birth, took me about 5.5 hours, and I had an enema. I was shaved. I couldn't eat. I couldn't drink. I was strapped down on a table. I was flat on my back with feet in stirrups and given an episiotomy. And then my baby was taken to a nursery. That's what it was like. 95% of women labored. Would have been considered to be a good birth, a short birth. How did I feel about it? I didn't think very much about it. It was what it was. And within a few years, I and hundreds of families started to develop Birthing Better. I didn't start doing this because I didn't like Lamaze or because I had any interest in birth. I've never had a political interest in birth. I don't care about your birth. You don't care about my birth. I care about my birth, and you care about your birth. And so the families that I worked with, because I did a lot of body work. I worked with a lot of women my age whose bodies have been damaged from birth. And I worked with a lot of pregnant women who had either had a baby or hadn't had a baby. And they often had bad backs. And they'd start telling me about their birth stories. I couldn't do anything about it. The only thing we could do about was things like, I had terrible pain in my back, or, I pushed for such a long time, or things like that. We couldn't deal with who they did or what they didn't do or how our partners were with us. So we just stuck to the commonality of our human body. But I was very fortunate over a 12-year period to see hundreds and hundreds of women birth and fathers who worked and developed these skills use these skills. The families I worked with were often very religious. I'm not. Couldn't have cared less. They had to fit these skills into whatever, and I had no medical training, still don't, couldn't care less, not an interest. Not interested in being a birth coach, not interested in being a birth educator, not interested in being a midwife, not interested in being a doula. That doesn't mean that you don't go to births. You go to births because they're happening. Half of the women and families I worked with who were very religious weren't going to go to the hospital because they had religious issues, and the other half couldn't wait to get into the hospital because they were taken care of. The medical profession had seen multiple millions of women from the 60s and 70s cope better than they had ever seen before. So the medical profession, by the time I had my next baby in the early 1970s, had changed. You could get up, you could walk around, you could eat, you could drink, you could do all sorts of things. Curious, some things really weren't right. So, for instance, natural birth advocates said women should get off their back and they should get into a position which was a semi-recumbent, which means you sit upright with your feet up. Well, it turned out that by blocking the sacrum, it made it really harder for us to get our babies out of our bodies. And that drove us into the body skills, as well as the fact that we were wearing bikinis and we didn't want to have a cesarean up from our pubic bone to our navel. So the doctors developed the bikini cut, or low-lying cesarean. And so the cesarean rate increased, along with, instead of general anesthetics, an epidural. So here we were in 1980 with a total change. Skills had been dismissed by the natural birth movement and choices been put in place. Natural birth movement didn't put choices in place so that women could say yes to more cesareans. They put choices in place so they would say no to more medical care. The words medical assessments, monitoring, and procedures now became the word interventions, which were meant to impose on women and unnecessary. This has just confused the conversation. We just needed to have skills, and Birthing Better developed at that point because hundreds of fathers and mothers developed these skills and nitpicked. So I had seen hundreds of births, and I gave birth in 1982. I went into labor 8 weeks early. Do you think I planned that? Really, I was in a strange town. You think I planned that? Never seen a doctor. Think I planned that? Went into a strange hospital. Do you think I planned that? No, it is what it is, what it is, what it is. Your birth unfolds as it is. And I can remember distinctively saying to myself, well, you have a choice to use these skills or you're just going to not use them. And I went, no, I've seen the most amazing births with people using these skills, right? And I'm going to use them. So I used them on the 3-hour drive to the hospital. Right? So I got to the hospital. They knew I was 8 weeks premature. They were in a tizzy about that because I'd only gained 8 pounds, so I didn't look very pregnant. So they hooked me up to an IV. I wasn't going to say no to anything that they did. Why? You're in their environment. They're there to try to protect you and your child. And I continued to use my skills. They wouldn't let me out of bed. That's the way it was. So I had to figure out how best to use my skills to get through birth. I arrived in the hospital at 5:30. I was not dilated at 5:30 in the morning. They told me they didn't think I was in labor. Well, I knew I was in labor. Well, I had him at 5 after 7. So I went from not dilated to fully dilated in an hour and a half and having him out. So why did that happen? Well, first of all, I had had a quick birth, my first birth. But second of all, I used skills because I had learned from Birthing Better families who I developed these skills with. Don't waste a contraction. You have to put your body in a position or a posture that your baby likes, and so many other things. So this is what I did. And I hope that it will help you understand. Use these skills in your birth, no matter how it is. One child used these skills for having 2 non-laboring cesareans. They loved preparing her body for birth, and they used the skills on the way to the hospital while being prepped and in the birth of their baby in a surgery. My other child used these skills, and the first time they didn't feel they'd used them effectively enough. He didn't feel that he had been as involved as he could have. In the second birth, he got more involved because he realized that midwives didn't know anything about these skills. So let me tell you about my experience. Got to the hospital, had to stay in bed, IV in the arm. Okay, narrow bed, can't eat, can't drink. I lay on my right side. No reason particularly why. I went in my mind, I softened inside the pelvic clock, which you're going to learn in one of those lessons, and then I'd have a contraction. The first thought that went through my head as this contraction sort of piled up was, why the F did I do that? Meaning soften inside that would allow my cervix to open more effectively. I got up on one knee with one leg up. I got to the end of the bed. I immediately felt sick to my stomach. I asked for a kidney bowl. I put my finger down my throat to went bleh, and I didn't vomit anything, but I felt that sick. And then I just made certain I stayed open, made certain that my body was aligned so that the contraction was effective, that it went up, had a peak, came down, and eased off. I made certain, I just said in my mind, open, open, open. And you know what the other voice was in my mind? Fuck, this hurts. That was it. So in the fuck, this hurts, and soften, soften, open, and I was aware of my body all the time. So then I'd lie back down on my right-hand side again. Who knows why my right-hand side? I just picked it. So then I would go around the pelvic clock again. I'd soften inside my right hip, soften inside my sacrum, soften inside my left hip, soften under the pubic bone. That allows the cervix to be retracted back effectively with each contraction. Then another contraction would hit. I'd do the same thing. I had a routine, right? But what happened is that I went from not dilated at all, not effaced at all, to fully dilated in an hour and a half, which meant that every 3 or 4 contractions, the labor picked up. And at that point, I checked myself. And you will learn in the internal work how to check yourself. I didn't have anybody with me. I just checked myself, put my finger in there, went up there and checked myself. And then the doctor would say, I have to check you too. And I go, fine. Right? I didn't care. Right? I'd check myself. And every time the contractions picked up and I checked myself, I could feel change. I didn't know if I was 3 or 4 or 6 centimeters. Who cares? I could feel change. That's what you need to feel. You connect your brain to your bottom. And once you do that, you always know where you are. So I go back down on my right side, go around the pelvic clock, get up, feel sick to my stomach, vomit, one leg down, one leg up, open, 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 fuck, 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 and keep my positions open. Contractions would change again, check myself. Second time I checked, doctor checked and said, you're about 3 centimeters. Well, I knew that the cervix wasn't behind the pubic bone, it was there somewhere, so I could feel an arc. And if you could feel an arc like that, that's about 6 centimeters. So, okay, routine, same thing. Few more contractions, change again, check myself, I could feel that the cervix has come behind the pubic bone. And I said to the doctor, feel I'm fully dilated. Doctor said, got to check. Fine, check. So she said, yep, you are fully dilated. They didn't want me birth there because I was 8 weeks premature. So they wanted to move me onto a gurney, take me down the hall to the theater. But you know what they asked me? They said, can other people who work here come in because they've never seen a woman birth on her own? I didn't care. Do whatever you want. I have business at hand. I was partially squatting on the gurney, holding on to the edge, and I could feel my child start to come down into the top of the vagina. And I just said, nope, can't do that. And the contraction stopped. I got wheeled into theater. There was a flat bed there, big light up there, and 12 people all masked up. Couldn't have cared less. They said to me, how do you want the bed? And I thought to myself, they're making me decorate. Jesus, I didn't know anything about that bed. And I said, I don't know. What does it do? So they put the top up and they put the leg down. I got onto the bed. I sort of squatted to the front because I couldn't go back far enough. And then I started to massage down there. And I immediately dried out. And I said to this crowd, I'm dry. To which I can remember to this day, 40 years later, this woman walking down to a cabinet at the foot of bed, getting a tube of something, coming up the other side, and it was KY jelly. She put a little KY jelly, and I massaged all down there. And then I'd have a contraction, and I would put my hand and just ease my baby. I had had a double episiotomy, routine one with my daughter 12 years earlier. So I could feel the tear, and because I was 8 weeks early, I hadn't done the internal work, right? But I massaged down there, and they just looked. And I then, between contractions, I just massaged there, and I made certain it was moist. But I could feel myself really stretching because of those previous cuts and the scar tissue there. So I had 2 contractions, and I just felt I was going to tear. So I said to the group, I think I need an episiotomy. To which 12 people said back to me, no, you got plenty of room. To which I thought to myself, you know, when you want them to do something, they don't always do it. So there I was. So I just massaged further, and I had 1 more contraction. His head came out. I took my hand off, and he just blew out of me all the way down to this very, very long umbilical cord. To which he was 8 weeks early. So they cut the cord, whisked him off, and then showed me the placenta. So I then jumped off the table to go see him, and they said, no, we've got a policy of 4 hours. To which I went, okay, because I have the rest of my life to be with my child. Bonding does not happen instantaneously for most of us. It just happens because we have to take care of this thing. So I just went 4 hours. They fiddled with him. They felt he was covered with staph infection. They wanted to give him an antibiotic. Okay, I'm in their place. They're trying to take care of us. That may not be what I had wanted. Does not matter. They're helping. Sure, give them antibiotics. I don't have to give them antibiotics the rest of my life if I don't want. That's my choice. But I'm in their environment. They're there to help me and help my baby. After 4 hours, they let me in. He was in a little incubator with this thing over his head, and I could reach in, and I said to him, I did not give birth to you to have you grow up in white noise and white light. You're just going to have to hang in there a little bit, and then I'm going to take you out and show you the flowers and the trees and the water and everything like that. And I just went back to my room, spent the night, went to sleep. Next morning they said he was fine, and I said, I'm going to take him home. To which they said to me, whoa, he's only 5 pounds. And I went, big enough. And the reason that they let me take him home was because they had watched me stay in control. I calmed them down by my behaviors. I had effective skills to birth my baby. And I cannot tell you how important it is. Those multiple millions of women who were using Lamaze in the 60s and the 70s in the United States calmed the medical profession down. They saw us cope. They saw us manage the best we could. They weren't the best skills. They needed to evolve. And the natural birth movement put a kibosh to that when they said, oh, cats and cows aren't taught to birth. Women don't need it. It's instinctive. We just need women to say no to medical care. And then famous authors said women should be left alone to discover birth. And famous other authors said midwives should sit in the corner and let women birth by themselves. We don't want to birth by ourselves. We're already doing it by ourselves. Nobody can do it for us, and we can't break for lunch. So we need the skills. It is so important. We don't care if you use Birthing Better. Use any other skills-based method. Just become skilled. You are in a crazy time right now. You can't stop yourself. You are going to give birth with or without people around you, with or without support people with you. You're going to give birth if you're in hospitals by people who are terrified. You have a choice. Either you become skilled or you don't. Your birth's going to happen one way or another. So when I decided to take him out, they said to me, we don't want you to. And I said to them, what would you like me to do to make you feel more comfortable? And they said to me, we want you to bring him back every day so we can check him. And I said to them, absolutely fine. I have no issue with that. Because when I work with healthcare providers, work together. These are human beings. These are men and women. These are mothers and fathers. They're your sisters and your brothers. They're human beings. Work with them. And the way you work with them is show them through your behavior that you are coping and managing, and then they will work with you. So, for 3 weeks, I drove 3 hours one way and 3 hours another way to have him come in and be checked. And after 6 weeks, he had an episode. He turned blue around here. And I called them up, and they said, bring him in. And they said to me, that ductus arteriosus that's still open in premature baby should have closed, and it hasn't closed. It's okay. It will close in time. Now, this child of mine is now very grown up, has kids of his own, has used these skills, and that ductus arteriosus is still not really fully closed. So there you go. So why did I want to tell you about my birth stories? Well, the reality is I can tell you hundreds and hundreds of birth stories and how Birthing Better skills have been used. You can find reviews on the website called the Pink Kit, because Birthing Better used to be called the Pink Kit. And it started to get reviewed in 2001 because it became a resource online in 2000. Now it's all online courses, and this COVID-19 Quick Birth Skills course is set up so that you can quickly go through these skills. Just remember, you have one shot at this. If you go in with skills, no matter how horrible it is, and if you just choose to use skills, you will birth better. And thank you for listening to this. Bye-bye.